Hello, everyone.
Hi everyone, how you doing?
I'll just give it a few minutes for people to trickle in, but I think most of you are popping in now. Yep. So I wanted to start by saying you are all very welcome to our webinar today, this time with one of our brilliant training facilitators and communications expert, May Flanagan. Let me start by just saying thank you to you all for taking the time out of your day to join us. And I guess a pre-thank you to anyone who's watching this session back on demand later. So my name is Erica Hearn, and I'm the Employer Relationships Lead here at Grow Remote. For those of you who might not be familiar with us, our mission is to solve the problems of remote work in order to unlock social, economic, and environmental change for individuals, employers, and local communities. This webinar specifically is centered around our employer services, which is a suite of supports that specializes in helping organizations and individuals overcome the challenges of remote and hybrid working. So we do that through multiple different avenues, some of which include consultancy, workshops, and training programs, and obviously webinars. So just a few housekeeping bits before we get started. As always, we invite you all to keep this session extremely interactive. I know that May has a few Mentimeter moments that are coming up, but other than that, feel free to pop your thoughts and feedback directly into the chat box, which is the bottom toolbar there at any time. And likewise, any questions that come up for you during the session, feel free to pop them directly into that Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom toolbar there. And equally, I think May will have a Mentimeter Q&A function that you can pop them there if you're happier with that. We do have quite a bit of time penciled in to answer your questions at the end of the session. So all going well, we should be able to get to a massive majority of them, if not all of them. Without further ado, I'd say I'll pass it over to the woman of the hour, May Flanagan. Over to you, May.
Thank you, Erica. Hi everyone, welcome. We're delighted to see so many of you registered and here today. It's brilliant when you have so much interest in a session. So we're hoping we're going to give you some really great insights today. So my name is May Flanagan. I am a communications consultant. I look at change communication, and I also facilitate training courses on communication, leading distributed teams with Grow Remote. I am a certified internal comms professional and an experienced facilitator for many years. And today really we'll be talking about how we can bring practical real world insights to help managers to help yourselves lead with clarity and confidence. So I am going to ask you, please get your phones, or you can go through a web browser and go to menti.com and put in the code 85251233. Now that code is at the top of the screen. So if you go to menti.com and use the code at the top of the screen. Shout in the Q&A if you're having any issues. It should be pretty straightforward. And firstly, I'm going to ask you, how are you feeling today? How are we feeling today? Good, bad, indifferent? Okay, we've got a couple of stressed, a couple of delightful, fantastic. Calm, love it. Channel lots of that calm through the session. Excited, brilliant. Energetic, fantastic. Happy the sun is out, yes. Apparently we will bask in the sunshine for the next week here in Ireland, so brilliant. Okay, on the other side, we've got anxious. Okay, that's okay too. Let's just acknowledge it. Not every day is an excited day. Some days we may feel a bit anxious, and that's okay too. A bit tired, bit hungry, get that. We're nearing lunchtime. You can always grab a snack. Feel free. Good form and calm, brilliant. That's a great one. Again, we'll channel that calm through. Okay, brilliant. Do you motivated? That's okay too. Hopefully by the end of today, you'll feel very motivated and energized. Ready for the weekend. I think we can all feel that sometimes. Okay, brilliant. Fantastic. Thank you everyone for sharing that. Brilliant. And I suppose the question that you've probably got in your head is why are you asking me how I'm feeling today? Well, when we go through some of these other slides, you'll see that individual differences can play a really large part in communication. And a really great way to open up that communication is to acknowledge any emotions or feelings that we may have and take a temperature, um, emotional temperature of the room. So for example, if I'm leading a training session, quite often at the start, I will ask people how they're feeling today. It's very similar to if you walked into a meeting room and you say, "How are you today? How's everyone? How are you doing?" And you have a little bit of chit chat at the start. It would give you an idea about how everyone's feeling. And then you can tailor what you're doing for the rest of the session to those moods. And in a minute, I'll ask you about energy level. You can tailor it to that too. And it just means that you're not bowling right in there with high energy, asking people to do lots of things. And actually, everyone's just not in that space and they may need a few moments to have an informal conversation about how maybe they're not feeling great today or something went wrong this morning. Then they may feel lighter and more open to moving into a discussion. Okay, so the next question that should be coming up automatically on your Menti is, where are your energy levels? So we have 1 being low, 5 being high, and 3 being okay, the okay, fine area. Okay, so most people are at the okay level. A good chunk of people. We've got some people in high, fantastic. Some people in low, that's okay. Got a nice distribution. Okay, brilliant. We've got a nice mix, but we are erring more on the side of okay to high, which is lovely. Okay, whoa, we've got a nice amount of highs there. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Lovely. Okay, and next, what were your reasons for signing up and attending today? So just keep it to a few, 1, 2, 3 words. No more than a few words. Doesn't have to be an essay. But just give me a reason that you signed up today and that you attended. So it's easy to sign up to lots of things, but you've really gone the full way and you're here today. You are here, you're watching, you're engaged. What was your main reason for doing that? Okay, so curiosity, engaging. Want to hear about remote communication, learning support, preparing for a remote job. Interesting. This will definitely help you with that, as will the workshop and training later. Okay, need guidance. Great. Curious. Get tips. Okay, a lot of people are saying that they'd like to get tips, support, learn more. Brilliant. Okay, well, certainly today you will. That's fantastic. All those reasons are great reasons because they're what we're here to do today. So fantastic. We're all on the same page, which is useful, I do find. And in 1 or 2 words, what would you like to get out of today's session? So if there was one thing to get out of today's session, and don't worry if it's an overlap on the previous slide, just give me one thing that you'd like to get out of today's session. So whether that's a particular challenge that you have or a particular issue, what would you like to get out of today's session? Okay, tips, skills, engagement, learn something helpful, practical takeaway, information. Tips on communication, brilliant. Examples, okay. We probably will, as we discuss through the Mentimeter, as we discuss through some of the information that we have for you today, just naturally examples will come up, but you can always pop in that Q&A box questions if you have something specific that you'd like an example of, and we can delve into that. And we have a good bit of time at the end for questions, which we welcome. Okay, confidence. To have your team more in sync, brilliant. Okay, that definitely today will help with that. Okay, motivation. Be more aware of bad practices. Okay, interesting. Today, what we will do is focus on those mistakes, but we'll focus on what you can do to improve those things. I would say, well, you could say, for argument's sake, you could say there's no such thing as bad practices. There are just practices that could be improved, and that's where we're going to focus. Okay, brilliant. Skills, takeaways, awareness, tips, hints. Brilliant. Just for transparency, I do have a screen over here on my right-hand side, and I am looking at it occasionally because I need to for this. So I'm not looking at anything too interesting on the other side, don't worry, I am engaged in what we're doing. And this is actually a point that came up in one of the questions that we got. Little things that you can do to build rapport and to build trust when you are in a hybrid environment or a virtual environment. And one of those things is to acknowledge something like that. Because although you may say, well, actually, the people are going to assume that you've got another screen and you're looking at it for the meeting that you're in or the session you're in, actually, they may not. And the research suggests there are so many little pieces of non-verbal communication that our brains unconsciously pick up on. And we may not even think, oh God, they looked at their screen. I wonder if they're looking at their emails and they're not listening to me. But your brain will actually recognize that. There's also another interesting piece of information that came up from research that when you're on a virtual meeting like this, there's actually a very teeny tiny delay. Well, there definitely was at the start of COVID when things were getting up to speed. And actually, again, your brain registers that at an unconscious level, even if you don't. And that's why it can sometimes feel a little bit disconcerting. It's that teeny tiny delay. So you can feel as if your brain goes, people aren't responding to what I've just said. Well, they are, but they're just a split second difference compared to if you were in person. Okay, so what's your current approach to communication with your business? Lots of you quick off the mark there. I didn't even have to say the question. Okay, formal versus too informal. Yes, that can be. Uh, I'm going to mention the phrase individual differences a lot today. When you get into that, and that's something we're going to mention later on in terms of a full training workshop. But today we'll just touch on it. But individual differences is a major thing with that, because for some people, their communication style is very formal. And for virtual meetings, they will sit and they may wear a suit jacket, and that's how they're comfortable. They are taking the office to a virtual meeting, whereas other people may feel, okay, well, actually, I'm a lot more comfortable because I'm sitting in my own house. There are no boundaries. So it's about setting expectations, and that's something where your communications charters will really help, because you are setting those expectations from the get-go. Okay, so this is what is appropriate for this type of communication, whether that's a meeting or a Slack channel or instant messaging, and this is, not so appropriate. And we may think that we don't need to set those expectations or define those boundaries, because people tend to assume that what they think is what everybody else thinks. And that's not always true. Okay. Open communication, great. Okay, give people time. Okay, lovely. That's great to hear. On the other side, some people saying more reactive, and actually a lot more responses saying reactive. And that would be something I would see with clients a lot. Reactive communication, because it's just, life is so busy, business is so busy. It's hard to do everything, but reactive communication certainly. And today when we talk about the charters, that will help to try and move the dial from reactive further towards proactive, recognizing that there's always going to be a little bit of reactive because things change so fast. Okay, not streamlined, unclear where to find information. Too much happens in chat. Yeah, I hear that a lot, that I've got all these IMs, I've got all these things coming through, and where do I go to get the information? It's fantastic that we've got so many tools. It's brilliant, in fact, but you have to define what channels you're going to use for which communications, so that when you're looking for something, you don't say, oh, is that in Teams chat? Is that in Slack? Is that in my emails? Is that in something else? Is it in a DM, or is it in a group? It's important to go through and define those. And that's what the group communications charter does. It goes through and it starts to define those channels, who's communicating where and how and for what purpose. And it really links back to setting expectations. What's the expectation with different types of communication, and where should I find it? Challenging, haphazard, yeah. Pleasing, okay, that's a good one. Differences by department, yes, it can be siloed and people can take different routes, which is fine. you can tailor things to different groups, but it's again about defining it and being clear on expectations and clarifying understanding. So one department doesn't go and do one thing and another department has no idea about it. Okay, needs must, yes. Lots of CCing, yes. Okay. And the next one, what's working well? On the other hand, what's working well with your team communication? So the last slide was talking about overarching communications approach in the business, but on a team level. So whether you have one team or you have multiple teams, what's working well within a team communication level? Processes, okay. Comes from a good place. Good. Sharing knowledge. Yeah, lots of knowledge sharing and sharing knowledge there. And you quite often see that when you come down to a team level is because it's a more one-to-one or 1-to-6 level, it's about knowledge sharing, it's about that peer-to-peer learning. Collaboration, great. Shared documents. Respect, that's a lovely one. That's a great word to see in there. Respect. Inclusivity. Informal chat, lovely. Email for work is formal. Openness, great. Informal virtual coffees. Well done. That can be that's a really great thing to do, but can be difficult to fit in. So well done. Boundaries, lovely. Okay, great. And then on the other hand, what's not working so well with your team communication? So we highlighted some challenges when we talked about your communications approach across the business. But on a team level, what's not working so well? What are some of those challenges, at that lower level? Okay, so time zones. Awareness of those time zones, that can be a challenge. But that can also, one great thing about that challenge is that there are some really easy solutions. So something that we include in the charters is this idea of synchronous communication, which is the communication that we're used to in real time, and asynchronous communication. So communication that happens, at a slower level, there are feedback loops. So when you have time zones, sometimes you're able to have a meeting where you're all there together virtually. But if you have someone in Australia, for example, that is a huge time difference. It can be very challenging, especially because you want to keep in contact. That's where asynchronous can come in. And that's where you can do things such as you have a meeting with the people that are able to make it. You, for example, create a Google document or a collaborative document that everybody can update. You record the meeting with the people that were able to make it, and they provide their feedback then and there. And then the recording and that collaborative document that everyone can update gets sent in an email. And the people in other time zones then are able to, okay, I'll watch the recording and then I'll add my feedback and my thoughts into that collaborative document. And you give them a deadline because, things may need to happen fast, but it's one way of asynchronously communicating and giving people the opportunity to feel empowered, feel included, even if they can't make that specific time. And from an individual differences point of view, and this is something we touch upon in other trainings, if your communications preference is a little bit more on the introverted side, you may prefer, not need, you may prefer to process information first of all, have a think, and then talk or express your feelings and your thoughts. Whereas if you're a little bit more extroverted, you tend, on the whole, not generalizing, but on the whole, tend to talk as you process. So to allow for different individual differences on the whole spectrum that entails, actually providing information beforehand or providing an opportunity to process and think before sharing comments can be useful. So asynchronous communication can be useful for time zones, but it can also be useful for allowing for individual differences. So, it doesn't just have to be a solution for one thing. Lots of these things overlap and are linked. Okay, other things that aren't working so well. Independent operators. Okay, yes, but maybe not having that team cohesion. Cultural nuances. Indeed, yeah, people are busy. Some people can be too informal. So going back to those setting of expectations. And where a couple of you there are talking about single contributors, um, that level of independence, maybe not always being useful when you want team cohesion. When you look at the charter examples that we have later on in this session, you'll see that part of that is working through and working out, okay, so where does everybody sit? What are those individual communications preferences? And how then do they fit into the overall team communication channels and expectations? And that can really help because those independent operators, as they're termed in one of the comments here, may not even realize that they're an independent operator. They may think, okay, well, it's coming from a really good place and I'm doing my best for the business and, you know, I'm great. They might not even realize. And what they're doing may not necessarily be a bad thing in terms of their intentions are good, but you need to bring all of that together so you include everyone. So they're not independent, they're a team instead. So that's where, even without saying, you don't need to say any of that, you just work your way through the charters, you have that collaborative discussion with your team, and it can help people to come in together without having to have that conversation because you're just clarifying expectations. And without that, then how are people to know where they're supposed to sit or what they're supposed to do? They'll just go on their own assumptions. Okay, biased synchronous comms. Yes, there is. There definitely is. Um, and definitely during COVID, a lot of people sat in back-to-back meetings. And again, research shows that that's not good. It's not good for our brains. Our brains actually, uh, you know, on a physiological level, are stressed. It's good to have breaks in every part of life, I suppose. And that's where asynchronous communication can be really useful. And we'll talk about that. Okay, jobs worthy. We might look at that later. I might ask you to pop a question on that into the chat later, so I can elaborate a little bit more on that particular comment. TMI, okay, yes. Awareness, cultural, yeah, we had that. A couple of cultural nuances there. Not very effective. Team comes is great, brilliant, always on expectation, fantastic. No clear guidelines, okay, yep. And I can see, yeah, oversharing from some, not always clear, lost in translation. So where we talk about interpretation and lost in translation, this is something I see a lot, but also that I feel quite passionate about. So back in, I think it was the 50s, long time ago, there was a theory called the hypothermic syringe model. And the idea was that it talked about media, and it talked about this idea that adverts assumed that you could almost inject a message into an audience. So you would tell people they needed something, like you need this deodorant and it's fantastic and you should buy it. And the assumption was that people would say, oh, wow, I do need that. You've told me that. I do need that. Thank you. I'll go and buy it. And it very much thought of communication as one way. We obviously know it's not. Just because you tell somebody something doesn't mean they're going to believe it or do it. The message or the communication that you are sending out or talking through doesn't really mean much in the way that actually it's all about interpretation. And you could say the same sentence to 10 people and they all could take it differently and have completely different interpretations. And while I see some of these challenges around, not always being clear, lost in translation, that's because quite simply the message and the interpretation may be different. So it's always worth clarifying your understanding and encouraging your team members to feel comfortable enough to clarify that understanding. So you ask them to do something and you just in return you get, yep, that's great, I'll do it. And then when they come back, it's not what you wanted because they didn't clarify their understanding and they didn't feel they needed to, or maybe they didn't feel that they could because they wanted to look like they had it all sorted. Creating that safety net that people feel like actually it's normal to ask to clarify understanding is really important. And that starts with role modeling. So you doing that and them seeing that actually someone who is at a higher level than me does it, so I can do it too. Okay, so I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail on these because I think we've covered a lot of them already. So top 5 mistakes, no strategy, structure, or consistency. So strategy can sound scary, but essentially a strategy is where you look at things at a more strategic level and you align it to your business strategy. So how is my comm strategy aligned to my business strategy and what I want to do there? Having a structure, when you look at a strategy, however big, small, even if it's 2 lines, even if you're just answering a question to yourself, having structure and consistency, which is what will underpin everything, makes a huge difference. And it actually helps to build trust. Because if people know what they need to do, how they need to do it, where communication is coming from, who they need to talk to, that they will be told what's going on regularly, then that creates a sense of calm. And I specialize in change communications. And part of that is looking into the neuroscience of looking at our brains and what our brains crave. And our brains crave routine and certainty. Even if we don't think they do at a very fundamental level. And by providing a structure and consistency, you are helping to create calm. And that is something we will go into in more detail in the training. But a great way to start this is to sit down and think, what do I want my communications strategy to be? And if that feels too scary, then just start with your charters. Just look at your charters, work through those. And the end of it, you should have a better idea or feel more comfortable or ready to look at maybe thinking about a strategy. But it doesn't need to be a 25-page document that looks fancy. It could just be a couple of questions that you've asked yourself. So don't overthink it or worry. Unclear expectations, I've covered this quite a bit. People assume that everybody knows what they mean. They may not. Everyone has different assumptions, and that's what they will default to. Under or over communicating. So under communicating, what's the problem with that? Well, if you don't communicate enough, then you could risk not having team cohesion, issues with trust. If I'm never hearing from you, can I trust you to be transparent, open, and honest as an organization? Like people can feel very isolated. I know you guys asked for examples earlier on. So one example I would have is I remember a particular learner, and they said, "Oh well, I'm working in a more distributed fashion now, and actually, I feel really isolated, and I want to have a chat with someone." And where one person may feel like, oh, that's the perfect level, another person may think, well, actually, that's under communication and I want more. So that's why it's so important to use your charters and talk to your team so that you can understand where that lies and what the balance is for each team and also overarching organization. The caveat is you're never going to make everyone happy, but you can at least at a team level allow for those individual differences. Over communicating, I think we all know the issues with that. You're just getting pinged from everywhere. It's coming from all angles and you don't know what to look at. So you just don't look at it because you're trying to just prioritize those reactive things. Missing context, non-verbal cues. So, you can't see body language. That can be difficult. But also, if you pop an email in your head, you think, I've just popped an email over. They know what I mean. But you may have had a lot more a lot more time to think about it. The person receiving that email may not have any idea of the context, and you need to provide it. And not listening to feedback, that's really important. You need to listen to feedback, you need to ask for feedback. Okay, so how to fix them, and this slide deck will be getting sent out afterwards, and I think I've gone through a lot already. But being intentional, having a plan, creating clear guidelines, being transparent, keeping it simple, clarify understanding. And a lot of this, it might seem like a lot of information, but those communications charters, those templates that Erica and I will be talking about later, should be your guide. This isn't a case of you have to sit down, look at this slide and start from nothing. Those charters will guide you. Put yourself in other people's shoes, in your audience's shoes, whether that's your team or the rest of your organization, and start with the why. Why? Why should they care? Why should it matter to them? What's the point of this communication? Whatever it is you're communicating, and what do they need to do? And assess noise levels. So noise can be, sounds, but there can be other types of noise going on as well, which we cover in the training. Provide context. Use non-verbal on-screen communication as much as you can. So try and be animated. You can still show your hands. You can move your face. Try and communicate non-verbally. Use technology. Great platforms out there. We cover a good few of those in the workshop. And have casual conversations, although lots of you seem to be on the ball with that already. Listen, encourage two-way feedback, and ask and act on feedback. There is no point in asking for feedback if you're not going to do anything with it, because people will not then give you feedback because they'll say, well, nothing happened. You can't act on all feedback, but what you can do is acknowledge it. Acknowledge it and act on some of the feedback at least, and show that you've done that, communicate that. Don't keep it in a corner, do all this great stuff and don't show people, tell people. And always bear in mind the individual differences. So the solution here we have is the communications charters and tool stack. This is just a summary of the different documents. I'm just aware of time. So in essence, an individual communications charter is a bit like a personal communications manual. Each person completes it. And then the idea then is that you sit down and you have a discussion, either one-to-one or maybe in a group setting. It's up to you. It depends on your team. And that's for you to learn more about how you can tailor communications. Team communications charter then is more of a document that you create together. It's a collaborative discussion, and really it just sparks discussion. The discussion you get out of it is incredibly useful. The document you come out with is one thing, but the discussion is another. It's extremely useful. And alongside that is a communications tool stack, which is a defined list of tools and methods for communicating as a team, sets those expectations of when and how tools should be used. Okay, and I am going to hand over to Erica to explain to you about the upcoming workshop.
Thank you very much, May. Yeah, so today is sort of a bite size of what we have coming up on June 5th. Essentially, it's if you're happy with some of the practical quick fixes you've learned today and you're ready to take things a step further, we'd love to see you at this upcoming session. As May kind of quickly mentioned, it's a hands-on workshop where you'll create your own communication charter, sort of based off of those, including the individual, the one for the team, and the tool stack based off of these templates that we've made ourselves. We'd guide you through the whole process sort of step by step, and then you walk away with something real that you can use with your team that same day or the following. It gives you that sort of, it's 2 hours, I believe, May, and it's very interactive. So we'll take your most pressing challenges and the supports that you need most at your individual organizations, and then mold them into these templates and make sure that you leave with something that is helping you communicate much more effectively from the get-go.
Yes, completely, Erica. It's definitely not a one size fits all. In the session, we go through your challenges. We have discussion. That's the whole point. And you talk to each other. So there's a lot of peer-to-peer learning. We also, a lot of this information is taken from real world examples that we have. So either with my clients, but also through Grow Remote. So we have our other training courses as well, leading remote teams. So we have managers. We know what the issues are out there and what people are facing. So you may think, oh, I'm having this issue and I'm the only one, and I guarantee you're not, because everybody has these issues. And sometimes it can help just to hear that somebody else in the group, in the training, to say, well, actually, I'm having the same issue. And I tried this and actually it worked really well. And you go, oh, wow, okay. It's not just me. And actually, yeah, that might work for me too. So lots of good information. Erica, did you want to add anything on this before we move on?
No, that's perfect, May. You can move on.
Okay, great. I think there'll be a link to the page to find out more information about the workshop, won't there, Erica?
I've just popped it in the chat box already. But
Brilliant.
equally, it'll go out in the follow-up email to you guys as well, along with a few other resources that you might be interested in.
Brilliant. That's great. Thank you. And just one word, if you do register for the workshop, we'll be asking for you to, tell us a little bit about what you're looking for before the training. And it will get tailored even before you get there based on what people are looking for, people who have signed up. So it's there for the taking. You can tell us what you need. Okay, I'm very aware of time and I know we have some questions, so I'm going to fly through a couple of questions for you all, and then I'm going to get to those questions that you guys submitted. And I will hang on for a few minutes at the end in case anyone has any they'd like to submit today. So go to menti.com if you're not already on it, 85251233, and could you please rate today's session? So just slide along for each line and let me know, was the discussion relevant to you and your work? Were the topics interesting? Was the content useful? Time well managed, we'll see. And hopefully it was pleasant and enjoyable. All answers are anonymous, obviously. Brilliant. Okay. Great. Okay, we're moving up to the top, so that's great. That's positive. Thank you very much, everyone. And if you have any comments after this session, feel free to contact us and let us know. Quickly, is there anything you wished we talked more about? Likewise, on the other hand, if you would prefer to wait and ask a question in the Q&A, don't worry, you can skip over this question. Thank you. Not at today's session. Brilliant. Thank you. Practical tips. Okay, we can include more of those. So for the person that added that comment, if you can add in a question to the Q&A around any specific practical tips you'd like, then I can follow them up in the Q&A when I answer all the questions. Lovely introduction. Thank you very much. Okay. Okay, and I am going to skip that one because we'll do the Q&A. But before we move on to those questions you submitted into the Q&A, thank you so much for today, and we would welcome your questions now. I'm going to open up.
I might just speak to some of the ones that have been put in the Q&A function box, if that's okay.
Oh, okay. Yes, perfect. Go ahead.
So I'm going to start with the one that has the most upvotes. How do you change a synchronous biased culture within the team? No pressure.
This is controversial, but you can't change a synchronous culture in a team. You have to work together to create that culture. Unfortunately, and that's the complex thing about culture, culture is not just defined by one person or made by or fostered by one person. It's a group thing. So my answer to that would be that you need to talk to your team. You need to talk to people about how they like to communicate. So the charters, not that I hate to refer back again, because it sounds like I'm on a script, but I'm not. Start with those conversations, talking to your teams. What are their communication preferences? When you get into those, you may start to understand why there's that synchronous communication culture. Because if you look at all your managers or at half of your teams are have particular communication styles that are very comfortable with synchronous communication, which is the kind of communication that we defaulted to for a very long time, then what you need to do is start off with educating them and bringing in asynchronous communication. But you need to do it in such a way that they have control over it and they're empowered to do it. Because if you just say, oh, we're going to use all this new stuff, what you might find from a change communications and change management perspective is that you get resistance and that they're like, well, I'm not using that. It's a new tool. I don't understand it. I'm not comfortable. And that's because there's fear. They're not comfortable. This is something new and they're getting told to do it, or they feel like they're getting told to do it. So what you need to do is have those open communications, understand where their comfort levels are, i.e. their communications preferences, and then start to think about, okay, so let's have a discussion about other ways that we could do it. Start to bring in a few suggestions and then empower people to get involved and take on these new ways of communicating. But very much it can't be a you need to do this, it needs to be an open discussion. And once you start to have an open discussion, you do the individual charters and the communicate and the group one, you may find that people start to say, well, actually, it's a bit, I'm in meetings all day. And that's where you can say, well, actually, maybe, do you think maybe we could do more? Do you think asynchronous communication? Or say something like, do you think maybe if we recorded the meetings, that might help? And you could maybe add into an email afterwards. Using the word asynchronous might feel like a lot for some people because they might not be familiar with that word. So just start off, okay, well, maybe do you think if we recorded the meeting, we sent out afterwards and you could just reply with your comments? Start slow. And if they take that on and they're empowered and they feel part of it, they're much more likely to take it on board. And then you build more of a culture of asynchronous and synchronous communication. But unfortunately, you alone cannot change the world.
Good.
Well, you can, I suppose, in lots of other ways, but synchronous communication wise and culture, I would say group. Sorry, Erica, next.
No, good answer, May. Actually, we only have 1 minute left. So for anyone that does have to jump off, feel free to do so. I will quickly say thank you again to all of you for joining us, and a massive thank you to May for sharing her expertise. I know I probably speak for us both when I say we hope that you guys took away a few solid ideas that you can start using now in terms of just your interactions day to day. But there is so much more that we offer. If you're interested, you will get all that information in your follow-up emails. But please, we're here for anything you need. And anyone who does want to stay on the line, I know that I have a few more minutes, and I think May, you said you might stay a tiny bit if needed.
Yeah, I'm happy to I'm happy to stay for the next 10 or 15 minutes. I know we've got some questions that
Yeah,
people submitted that they want answers to. I think this session will be recorded and sent out, won't it, Erica?
it will indeed.
So if you do need to jump, and then just catch the recording and you'll get all the answers. If you have a question, pop it into the Q&A before you leave and we'll do our best to get to as many as we can.
Perfect. All right. So in terms of the next question for those who are staying, most upvotes is, how do you know which tool you should use for different types of communication?
Again, it's a collaborative conversation. So when you move through, so I referred to the group communications chart. So that's where you sit down, you start to define, okay, so for different types of communication, so our particular weekly meetings, or maybe, those more operational communications. How are we doing that? How are we communicating? If something's an emergency, how would we communicate? If it's an emergency, for example, there's no point in emailing if that's not your default for emergency. You need to clarify for each type of communication, each thing that you're doing, what the best tool is. For some, you'll know, but for others, it might be a case of, oh, well, actually, I have no idea what's going to work for people. And when you sit down with your team or your teams and you have that conversation, one example I came across was where for emergency communications, they were like, oh, well, we decided to use Slack for emergency communication. So if there was an emergency, I'd put a message in the Slack channel, but people just weren't picking it up. And then when they sat down and had a discussion, it turned out that 3 people in the team, that just wasn't their comfort. It wasn't their comfort level. And also they were busy. It was quite a hands-on organization. And they weren't necessarily able to look at their phone or their computer to see that Slack message. They were having sensitive conversations, so their phone had to be on mute. And they turned around and said, well, actually, if you need something in an emergency, you need to ring me. And there needs to be an expectation that that person's phone number, that person who might be ringing you about the emergency, that phone number, or maybe a group of phone numbers, are in everybody's phone settings as an exception. So there's do not disturb, or unless person A, B, or C is ringing me, and then it rings. Because they said, if I'm having a conversation with somebody who's in dire need of my help, really sensitive situations, I can't just be stopping for everything and checking my phone. That's completely inappropriate. But if my phone rings, I know it's one of those three people that is ringing me about something, and it is an emergency, so I will answer the phone. So ask people. Sometimes, a bit like culture, it's not about you sitting there trying to work out all the solutions on your own. It's about having a conversation and working them out together.
That makes perfect sense. And I think you're right. That's kind of the answer for so many of these things, like what works for one person or one team won't work for the next one. So crowdsourcing and finding out what suits people best is the best way forward. I wanted to bring one up that we got a few questions when people were signing up for the session. And I know that this one I've heard in my conversations with people in the past, and I've actually felt it at some of my previous companies. Somebody had asked, how do you learn how to make your meetings more engaging and just get more involvement from people on the call?
I'm looking at my other screen because I think we got a question through. I got a specific question through about this.
Yeah.
And I'm going to go back to individual differences. It's about thinking about those individual differences. What works for one person might not work for another, which means you need to think about having a variety of ways of engaging. So if you're thinking about it logically, you say, okay, well, actually, I might not know what the communication preferences of my team are. So I'll cover a few different areas. So maybe before we have a meeting where I want to have a discussion about something and I want everyone's input, I might send those questions in advance and say, look, we're going to be discussing these questions. Have a think about them in advance. Then in the actual meeting, you might say, okay, people might unmute and talk, but give also people the opportunity to pop their messages, their comments into the chat. If you go into a meeting, straight away ask people's opinions, what you're going to get is those more extroverted people who are processing and talking at the same time. I'm an extrovert. I can say I can say that. And they're going to be the loudest voices. And your more introverted team members either may not say anything because they might not feel comfortable, or maybe they're not ready to say anything because they want to have a think. Or those other voices are just so loud that everybody else can't get a word in edgeways. So I would think about those individual differences, provide an opportunity to have a think and process beforehand, allow people to pop a message in the chat as well as unmute. And then on the other side, using tools such as Mentimeter are extremely valuable because that means that people can add to a discussion like those word clouds earlier, and everybody has equal footing. I can hear one voice the same as another on a Mentimeter word cloud. So there's no temptation for one person to overtake the conversation. Then once you've got that information, you can ask people to elaborate. You can allow those people who are really passionate, perhaps about a particular point, to talk, but at least you have a basis. And for people, who aren't comfortable talking in a group setting, you could always say, look, if anyone wants to have an individual conversation about any of this, providing that option too, because they may not feel comfortable in a group setting.
No, that makes perfect sense. I think, May, we'll do one more and then we'll let everyone go. Thank you so much for the extra time. But this one, I think, is a bit different and so, so important. Somebody's just asked, how do you convince the C-suite that better communication would alleviate some ongoing issues?
Sorry, Erica, could you just repeat that question? I think the
Yeah.
reception went.
So it says, how do you convince C-suite, so, CEO, CEO,
Yeah.
what have you, that better communication would alleviate some of their ongoing issues, a company's ongoing issues?
So this is about strategy. So that's why one of the mistakes that we said there was about being strategic. So in order for business leaders to see the value of communication, first of all, it needs to be the communication strategy. There needs to be one, and it needs to be aligned to the business strategy, because leaders are going to want to know if you are spending time on something and money on something, perhaps, well, time is money also, that it needs to be aligned to the business strategy and the business KPIs. They want to know, how is this going to contribute towards my bottom line, in essence, which means then you need to get into data and the monetary cost of things, which can be tricky. Obviously, it can be tricky because you need to put a monetary value on things that aren't always that easy to see. So you have to sit down and say, well, actually, for example, if communication is not efficient, how much time are people wasting? And this is where things like an informal survey can really help, because you can
Great.
ask people, sorry,
No, I said that's a great point.
an informal survey, ask people what are their pain points, what's working, what's not working, how much, are they wasting time trying to find information that they can't find anywhere? Uh, Once you start to define some of those things, a survey will give you data. Try and keep to quantitative questions that will give you stats, in addition to a couple of qualitative. Also, more people are likely to respond to your survey if it's quick and easy to do. And then the second area I would go to, and this is from my own experience years ago when I was first starting to create strategies and get a business case together for investment in an organization I worked in, was look at the research. There is so much research out there that will put a monetary value onto lots of things that are impacted by communication. So things such as employee motivation and employee engagement, the the impact on employee churn and losing employees, how much money it costs to replace an employee. By the time you reskill, you train them up, you get them up to a standard where they're good to go. The amount of time of their time, but also internal time for you, the cost for a recruiter, just so much money. There are some really great pieces of information out there. So in terms of resources, I would be looking at the likes of Gallup, Gallup, also Gartner, Garter. There are also some really great books out there. There's a really great book called Drive. Drive is by Daniel Pink. Actually, I might ever have it over there. Really great book that talks about what actually motivates employees. I'm sorry, what motivates us also as people. Lots of real world examples, not just work ones. And it can really help you to build a business case of, well, actually, if we did this or this, because it's not always a case of if you give someone a salary rise, then they will stay. Actually, it could be more about their day-to-day experience with their manager, with their team, with the organization. And communication is an integral part of that. Some of the misunderstandings that happen, or the difficult conversations that don't go well, could have gone really well if there was a communications strategy or communications charters. I'd say more so even communications charters in place. And I hear examples of this all the time, difficult conversations about performance management or difficult conversations where someone's saying that they're not happy and they want to leave. And because both people don't understand the other person's point of view and the manager hasn't put themselves in the shoes of the other person before they get into that meeting, they've made assumptions consciously or unconsciously. Communication doesn't flow because nobody's on the same page. No one's checking for clarity of understanding. It's just a one-way, both ways, one-way communication both ways. And then you end up with a really great person leaving because they come out of that meeting just so frustrated. So communications charters. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that strategic perspective of like, this is what you're losing when you don't have these things in place is so helpful. And just a quick double stamp on Gallup for analytics, brilliant resource that we use
Brilliant.
constantly for remote. May, thank you so much. Thank you for your extra time. I'm sure that was brilliantly valuable to everyone, including myself. Everyone else who is still on the line, keep an eye out on your emails because you will be getting quite a few opportunities as well as the playback of this, and any questions we haven't answered, I'll include in that follow-up email answers as well. Thank you so much and have a lovely rest of your day and enjoy the sunshine.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.